The Emerald Night, Chapter 19. When Clint found his daughter again, she was sitting in the garden, on a blanket, surrounded by brightly colored packages and cooing. Arenda stood beside her, moving things out of her reach as she tried to grasp them, though the baby seemed less frustrated by this behavior than she normally would be. Clint assumed that she sensed something was amiss in the little play he had performed during the banquet and was trying to placate everyone, so he jogged up to the blanket and knelt by her side. He smoothed out her dress and noticed that no one had changed her out of it, so there were still splatters of blood along the hemline. He frowned and turned to ask Arenda why no one had rectified the situation, but she began speaking first, so he remained silent. "Welcome back, love," she said, and gently tugged him up by the shoulders so that she could wrap him tightly in her arms. Is she okay?" he asked, glancing down at his daughter. "She's ready to open her presents," Arenda hissed as Baruana stood and toddled over to the pile again. Arenda pulled away and lifted her child. "But I would really rather wait until Uncle Gareth has made his appearance. He sent a letter saying that he would be coming, but I haven't seen hide nor hair of him." "I hope nothing happened," Clint said, and his voice hitched in the middle, as if another sob threatened to break free. "You can't hurt that old sea dog." Morgan came to a stop beside Anilla, who had taken Arenda's position guarding the presents. "That motherfucker will live through anything, and now that he's flying a Aurelian flag, no ship will touch him." Clint made a non-committal noise and added, so quietly that even Arenda barely heard him, "He's the only family you have left." "I've been here, boy!" a voice boomed, loud enough to shake the castle, and everyone jerked their heads to the sky, trying to figure out where it was from. Captain Noctiface was leaning over the parapet on the roof, the mask he wore glowing in the sunset, and took off the hat he was wearing to wave at the crowd below. In his other hand he held a sort of cylinder, and when he put it to his mask his voice boomed once again. "Not to fear, princess!" it reverberated, and Bruana cackled in delight. "Uncle Cappy is here, and he has something amazing! We have to wait for the sun to set!" "How the hell did he get in here and sneak all the way up there?" Arenda narrowed her eyes, and Clint shrugged. "I expect the good captain has skill that should not be underestimated," Anilla replied with a smile, and Arenda turned her angry gaze to her. "Don't make excuses for him," she snarled. "Our security should be tighter. We shouldn't just have assassins and pirates wandering around." "What's that, Captain?" came a much weaker voice. "Not to worry." "Gareth!" Arenda shouted, wheeling her voice to carry high enough to reach him. "What the hell are you doing?" Captain Noctiface waved his hand over the mask, and the expression changed to one of cheeky glee. Then he disappeared behind the parapet, and Arenda scowled. "Clint," she asked, "how hard would it be to take out one more fire fist?" "It might actually kill me." Clint gently took the baby from her. "Don't say shit like that, Rendy, not even as a joke." "I'm afraid he's going to set the castle on fire." Arenda was still glaring at the space the captain had once been. "It's not funny," Clint protested as the last dying rays of sunlight fell upon his face. "Is it dark enough, Captain?" another mystery voice asked, so low as to almost be inaudible due to the distance. "Let's light 'em up!" Gareth agreed. There was a loud booming, as if the palace were under siege by a troop of fire mages, and suddenly the sky exploded. Arenda screamed, and Clint pulled his daughter close to his chest. He was glowing again, but there was no danger. There was no danger, and the princess was safe, and everything was all right. Bruana had lost her mind in delight. She stared at the sky and clapped her hands and shouted encouragement at whoever had caused this marvelous thing to happen. The fire in the sky broke apart with another sound like the shout of a god and broke into pieces. They fizzled out before they hit the ground, and Gareth's voice rang out again. "Light 'em up!" Another burst of light lit the sky, and the crowd below watched, transfixed, as it broke into smaller segments, filling the air and fell away to nothingness. All around him the guests began to clap, the polite clap of the nobility, and Clint finally began to relax. "It's beautiful," he gasped, but Arenda was determined to be contrary. "What the hell are they doing up there?" she asked. "Light 'em up!" Gareth screamed again, and the repetition began to grate on Arinda's already frazzled nerves. The air smelled like sulfur, and suddenly she recognized it. "Oh," she said, relaxing a little. "It's that stuff Falsbeard invented. They use it to shoot projectiles. They're going to destroy my castle." "I don't think they will, Rendy." Clint smiled and transferred Bruana to one arm so he could slip the other over his wife's shoulder. "Just enjoy the show. It's beautiful and made of fire. Like you." "Flattery won't calm me down, Clint," she said in a voice that implied the opposite. "Pretty!" Bruana announced, pointing to the sky, and then returned to clapping. By the time the show had ended, darkness had fallen in full, and neither the stars nor the moons could penetrate the smoke the sky fire had caused, so servants began to light the lamps throughout the garden. Gareth walked out of the castle, followed by a small group, and held out his arms. "Give me the princess!" he demanded. "Uncle Cappy!" Bruana called and reached for him. "Can you hold her?" Clint asked in concern. "With your hand?" "I can hold anything, boy." Gareth brushed him aside and collected his niece. "This is prime dwarven craftsmanship, right, Fulsey?" "Absolutely, Captain," the dwarf following him replied, and picked up a glass of wine from a passing servant. He stared at it, put it back, and took the tray. The servant arched an eyebrow, but let him have it. "It takes more than the Emerald Knight to do in the great Captain Noctiface." Gareth raised the child in his outstretched arms and tossed her into the air. She cackled as he caught her, so he did it again. "Don't drop her, Gareth." "I'm not going to drop her." He threw her again, and every time she passed over the mask, its expression changed, growing happier and happier. When the grin threatened to spill out the sides, he pulled her close and raised the bottom of the mask just enough to plant a kiss on her forehead. "Did you enjoy the light show, Princess?" "Pretty!" the baby exclaimed, and as Gareth lowered the mask, she tried to rip it off, but the enchantment kept it firmly glued to his face. "Lovely party, Arinda." The human woman at his side clapped her hands and bent to squeeze her shoulder. As she did, Clint took a step back and averted his eyes, because the top she wore was cut in such a way that if he didn't, it would be impossible not to seem lewd. "Did you set my house on fire?" Arinda asked, ignoring her motherly tone. "What's that?" An ancient man in a tattered set of maid robes asked from behind them, and pushed his way to stand beside Gareth. "Not to worry, stone doesn't burn, you see." "Stone doesn't burn," the tiny dragon on his shoulder agreed. "But the furnishings and tapestries do. But nah, kid, we didn't." He took flight and came to rest on Gareth's shoulder. "You gotten big, Princess." Bruana grabbed him and pulled him into a hug. He made no protest, but it was obvious that she was hurting him, so Clint stepped up and pried the small creature from her grasp. "Gentle, Princess, gentle," he advised. "Captain, can you give her back so she can open her presents?" He wouldn't meet Gareth's eyes and was thankful he wore a mask, but it was still difficult for him to ask anything of the man who had watched him murder his entire family, so he added, in a quiet voice, "Please?" "I dare any of you blue bloods to top my light show!" Gareth screamed at the crowd and tossed Bruana into the air again. He caught her and fell to one knee to set her on the blanket, while Clint jogged away to grab a servant. Many of the gifts from the visiting nobles were standard fare, and things that Bruana held no interest in. As a baby, she was not particularly impressed with jewels or fancy clothing, and began to feel as if she had been lied to. The pile grew smaller and smaller, and she found that very little of it was of any use at all. She grew so frustrated that she refused to open any more disappointments, and Clint sat with her, drew her into his lap, and tried to get her to focus. Arinda began to hand the gifts to him, and he would open them to show them to her, in an attempt to raise her spirits. "Oh, look at this, Princess!" he exclaimed, trying to get her to take a knitted undergarment. "This is made of sterilite. If you wear it, no one can hit you with magic." He turned to the crowd and nodded at a woman. "Thanks, Mary. After what happened tonight, this means a lot to me." Bruana was unimpressed and tore the garments from her father's grip, then threw it into the pile. She tried to boost herself on his thighs and escape his grasp, but he held her firm and sat another present in front of her. She wailed in annoyance and smacked it in an attempt to knock it away. Her father expertly assessed the situation, though the knowledge did nothing for his nerves. "I think she's getting sleepy," he told Arinda, and his wife sighed. "I'm sure she is," she agreed. "Here." Anila crouched by Clint and held out her arms for the baby. He handed her over, and Anila stared at her for some time before she went on. Princess Bruana Morgana Noctiface Firefist, heir to the throne of the Aurelian Empire, princess of all elvenkind. It is my greatest honor to bestow upon you the magics of the Draken. You are one of us, hatchling, and you will grow with your broodmates into a strong warrior. I sense within you the soul of a mighty warrior, and it will be nurtured like the Draken you are. I wish to grant you the honor and compassion you will need to complement your fiery soul. You are always welcome among us. You are one of us. She had no lips, but she pressed the front of her snout to Bruana's face in the semblance of a kiss, then rubbed across her forehead with her scent glands the way Draken do to their own young. This did nothing to improve Bruana's cranky mood, and she swatted at her aunt. The princess's aversion to anti-kisses did not dull the magic that took hold of her, and she began to glow with a soft, white light as Thanilla sat her back on the blanket. She huffed, ignored it, and lay on her side in an attempt to take a nap. Morgan stepped in front of her and spread his arms. "Royalty of Zren!" he announced, and Clin rolled his eyes. "I am Morganae Magnus, last of the High Elves, forged from the very living soul of Zren herself by the god Theseus. Gaze upon me, mortals, and fear." Oh my god. Clin met Arinda's eyes and nodded at Morgan in a gesture that conveyed the second-hand embarrassment he felt for his dramatics, and Arinda nodded. Morgan pivoted on his heel, bent at the waist, and scooped up Bruana, and held her out in front of him. "This child is our legacy," Morgan said, and Bruana squirmed because she was bored and tired. "She will be the person to revive the culture of the High Elves. I have chosen her to take under my wing, and by divine right, I bestow upon her all the magics of her position." "Uncle Morgan!" Bruana continued to squirm and smacked at his arm. "Down!" "Shush," he whispered. "I have a whole big thing I'm doing." She whined in response. "This child will take a piece of my very living soul, making her one with the planet itself. Stand back, mortals! If any of you step into my sacred circle, your very life force will be drained away." He sat Bruana on the ground and began to dance. As he did, a soft purple light began to radiate from the ground in the shape of a circle. A second circle appeared within, and the crowd gasped and fell back as the runes began to dance between them. They spun in opposite directions, and Morgan began to speak. His words made no sense. The language was unknown to the nobles, but it held the deep, rumbling undertones of an animal. It was primal, ancient, and despite how silly Clin had found the notion, the crowd did look upon him in terror. Bruana had lain down again, this time with her face in the grass to block the light, and seemed determined to sleep through the magical ceremony. As Morgan spoke, a dark cloud seemed to flow from him, and out of him like a fog, but it did not seem to be able to pass the boundary created by the magic circles. "I specifically told him not to do this," Clin told his wife in annoyance, and flagged down one of the servants with a tray to grab them both a glass of wine. "Let him have his theatrics," Arinda shrugged. "I just want to get through this night and get her to bed before she starts screaming in front of everyone." When the cloud was so thick it obscured everything within the circle, it began to retreat. Arinda's fears were confirmed as Bruana began to cry, and as the fog became thinner and thinner, it seemed that she was objecting mostly to the fact that she was floating. Suspended in midair, the cloud was flowing into her, absorbing into her body, until the last wisps were gone, and the light faded from the ground. Morgan reached out and plucked her from the air, turned to her parents, and bowed. "It is so rare for a child to receive such a gift," he said in his announcer's voice. "But this is a rare child. Princess Bruana has been touched by gods and demons. She has been honored with gifts tonight from High Elves and Draken. She is destined for greatness!" Clin could barely contain his rage, and placed a hand over the stone to block the light that had seeped through his clothes as he stood on shaking legs. Are you done, Morgan? He asked. Yes. Morgan smiled and held her out to him. Clint snatched her with such ferocity that it startled her awake, and she began to scream in disapproval. He sighed and held her to his chest with her head resting on his shoulders and began to bounce. Hey, Princess, he asked. You think you can stay awake long enough to see what Daddy got you? No! She was adamant in her response and slapped at him in annoyance. But look! He turned her around so she could see the foal that one of the groomsmen had led into the garden. Bruana's entire face lit up and she began to squirm. Pony! She shouted. Horsey! 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 Clint sat her on the ground and she took off at a run, fell directly on her face, picked herself up, and plowed into the foal. It staggered a little, but lowered its head and allowed her to wrap her little arms around its neck and squeeze with all her might. Daddy! She shrieked in joy. Horsey! Pony! Baby! You like her, Princess? Clint put his hands on his knees and bent over to be more on her level. Was she worth staying up for? Love Daddy! Bruana replied without looking at him because she was too busy burying her face in the foal's fur. Love Horsey! God damn it! Morgan crossed his arms and pouted. He was right, she does like the horse better.